The howl of the Montana wind masked the sound at first, in the darkest hour before dawn, while rain lashed against the farmhouse windows. Whisker's ears twitched. The gray tabby's yellow eyes snapped open. Something wasn't right. The three German shepherds, Rex, Duke, and Shadow, were still sleeping, their massive bodies curled around Jack, who had finally fallen into a fitful slumber after another night of terrors. Sarah had drifted off in the armchair nearby, medical journals scattered across her lap. Whiskers rose, his striped tail straight as a rod. A soft mewl died in his throat, replaced by something else, a low, guttural growl no house cat should make. He pawed at Duke's muzzle, then Shadow's. With increasing urgency, when the dogs didn't stir, Whiskers did something extraordinary. He barked not a meow, but a choppy, determined bark that startled Sarah awake. What on earth? Then she heard it. The roar of water, the cracking of wood. Jack! The creek's breached! She screamed. But her husband sat frozen, eyes open yet unseeing, locked in the grip of his demons. The floodwaters were already seeping under the door. How could an abandoned cat, raised by three military dogs, not only mimic their behavior but somehow transcend it? And how could this unlikely hero save a broken soldier and change everything we understand about animal instinct? The answer began 2 years earlier, with a storm not unlike tonight's, and a tiny, dying kitten who refused to surrender. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. The Rolling Hills farm sat nestled between two mountain ridges in western Montana, as much a refuge as it was a homestead. Jack Wilson had purchased the 40 acres with his military pension in 2016, seeking solitude after 3 grueling tours overseas. At 35, his body had returned mostly intact, but his mind remained fragmented, haunted by the things he'd seen and done as an Army Ranger. Sarah, his college sweetheart turned wife, had followed him willingly, transferring her veterinary practice from the suburban clinic in Oregon to their barn, converted into a modest animal hospital. Her specialty in animal behavior had always been more passion than profession, but in rural Montana, it became their lifeline. Animals don't judge, she'd told Jack when suggesting they bring his 3 military service dogs, Rex, Duke, and Shadow, to live with them. The German shepherds had been retired from service around the same time as Jack, their bodies also bearing the invisible scars of war. Duke walked with a slight limp from shrapnel. Shadow had lost part of his left ear, Rex startled at sudden noises, but the bond between man and dogs remained unbroken. The locals in nearby Pinewood Population 2724 had welcomed them warmly enough, though their Montana stoicism kept most at a respectful distance when Jack's 1,000-yard stare made an appearance. "That Wilson fella fought for our country," old Bill Henderson would say at Darlene's diner. "Deserves his peace now." Peace, however, proved elusive. Jack's nightmares frequently tore through the night, his screams sending the roosters into premature morning calls. During daylight, unexpected sounds, a car backfiring, a door slamming, could send him diving for cover. Only the dogs seemed to understand, pressing their warm bodies against him during episodes, licking his face until the present slowly reclaimed him from the past. Sarah watched her husband carefully in those early days, documenting his interactions with the dogs in her leather-bound journal, the one she'd later show to disbelieving doctors. Standard animal-assisted therapy they'd dismiss with clinical detachment, But those doctors hadn't seen the way Rex would place his paw precisely on Jack's chest when his breathing became erratic, or how Shadow would howl exactly 11 minutes before a full-blown panic attack, giving Sarah precious time to intervene. The farm struggled financially that first year. Montana winters were unforgiving, and neither of them had anticipated the cost of heating the drafty farmhouse. But they endured. They always had. Spring came late to Montana in 2017, the winter reluctantly surrendering its icy grip on the land. It was during the first real downpour of April that Sarah found what she initially thought was a drowned rat beside the creek that bordered their property. The rain had been pounding for 3 days straight, turning the dirt roads to mud and the gentle stream into a rushing torrent. "Jack," she called out, cupping the tiny, soaked bundle in her palms. "Jack, come quick." Her husband emerged from the barn, Rex at his heels, even from 20 yards away. Sarah could see Jack's shoulders tense at the urgency in her voice. "It's a kitten," she explained, using her body to shield the fragile creature from the driving rain. "Can't be more than a few weeks old. Someone must have dumped it." Jack's expression darkened. In their year at Rolling Hills, they'd discovered the grim rural tradition of unwanted animals appearing mysteriously near their property, locals having learned of Sarah's veterinary background. Usually, she rehabilitated and rehomed them. But this was barely alive. "Just leave it, Sarah," Jack said, his voice flat. "Nature's got its course." Sarah ignored him, already mentally cataloging what she would need: heating pad, eyedropper, kitten formula she kept for emergencies. "Duke, Shadow," she called to the other shepherds watching warily from the porch. "Inside, boys." The introduction didn't go smoothly. The 3 German shepherds circled the laundry basket where Sarah had created a makeshift intensive care unit, their massive heads lowered, nostrils flaring as they investigated the intruder. Shadow growled low in his throat. Duke backed away, uninterested. Only Rex remained, head cocked in what seemed like concern as the kitten mewled pathetically. "Easy," Jack warned the dogs, surprising Sarah with his intervention. For 3 days and nights, Sarah barely slept, feeding the gray tabby kitten every 2 hours. Whiskers, she named him, for the few wispy white hairs that sprouted unevenly from his tiny face. Jack maintained his distance, watching from the doorway of their kitchen as if the kitten might somehow contaminate their carefully constructed routine. "It won't make it," he predicted on the 4th morning, as Sarah's exhaustion became evident in the dark circles under her eyes. But Whiskers defied expectations. By the end of the week, his eyes, startlingly yellow, were open and alert. By the 2nd week, he was wobbling around the basket. And by the 3rd, Sarah noticed something odd. Whiskers didn't meow for food like normal kittens. Instead, he sat perfectly still beside his empty bowl, waiting, just like the dogs waited for their command to eat. "Well, I'll be damned," Jack whispered, witnessing this for the first time. It was the first genuine spark of interest she'd seen in him for months. The truth about Whiskers' past emerged on a stormy July evening, nearly 3 months after his arrival at Rolling Hills Farm. Dr. Martin Campbell, the aging county veterinarian who occasionally consulted with Sarah on difficult cases, recognized the distinctive markings on the now thriving tabby. "That's the Henderson cat," he remarked, scratching under Whiskers' chin as the cat sat with unusual stillness on the examination table. Or rather, Clara Henderson's cat before she passed. Her son Robert took over the place. Sarah frowned, recalling Robert Henderson, a surly man known for his prize-winning cattle and equally well-known distaste for smaller animals. "Robert Henderson hates cats." "Precisely." Dr. Campbell nodded gravely. "Word is he's got those hunting dogs now. Mean as sin. Wouldn't surprise me if he—" The old veterinarian left the implication hanging, but Sarah understood. The creek where she'd found Whiskers half dead ran directly downstream from the Henderson property. That night, she shared the revelation with Jack as he sat on the porch. The setting sun painting the distant mountains in hues of amber and gold. The three shepherds lay at his feet, while Whiskers, breaking every rule of feline behavior Sarah had studied, sat perfectly aligned with them, his posture an uncanny mirror of Rex's vigilant stance. He was abused by someone who hated cats, but loved dogs, Sarah said softly. And now he's modeling himself after the dogs because he thinks that's how to survive. Jack's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, but his hand reached down to stroke Whiskers' gray striped back. The connection forming between man and cat was as unexpected as it was undeniable. Later that night, one of the worst summer thunderstorms in recent memory crashed over the farm. Lightning split the sky in blinding flashes, thunder following almost instantly, vibrating the windows in their frames. Jack, triggered by the explosive sounds, fell into a severe episode worse than any Sarah had witnessed in months. The shepherds, normally his anchors during these storms, grew agitated themselves. Rex paced anxiously. Duke barked at the rumbling sky, and Shadow retreated under the dining room table, his traumatic war memories evidently surfacing with each thunderclap. Sarah tried her usual techniques, the breathing exercises, the pressure points, the calming words, but Jack remained unreachable, curled into himself on the floor, shaking violently, trapped in some hellish memory from thousands of miles away. Then, something extraordinary happened. Whiskers, who had been observing from atop the bookcase, descended with deliberate movements. He approached Jack, a man he'd largely avoided until now, and pressed his small body against Jack's chest, directly over his pounding heart. The cat began to purr, the vibrations steady and rhythmic, a counterpoint to the chaotic storm. Jack's eyes, previously unseeing, focused on the cat. His breathing, ragged and shallow moments before, began to synchronize with the rumbling purr. Slowly, minute by minute, he came back from the brink. "Sarah," he whispered hoarsely. Hours later, as the storm finally moved eastward, "I think we need to rethink everything we know about this cat." By the end of summer 2018, Whiskers had developed a repertoire of behaviors that defied everything Sarah had learned in veterinary school. The gray tabby not only continued to eat on command like the shepherds, but had also mastered sitting, staying, and even a rough approximation of shake that involved extending his paw with military precision. More remarkably, he had appointed himself Jack's unofficial emotional support animal. "It's like he knows," Sarah told Dr. Campbell during one of his visits. 20 minutes before Jack has an episode, Whiskers finds me, meows once, just once, and leads me to wherever Jack is." The old veterinarian shook his head. "Cats don't do that, Sarah. They're solitary predators, not pack animals with hierarchical behaviors." "Tell that to Whiskers," Sarah replied. nodding toward the window where, outside, the cat was trotting obediently behind Jack and the 3 German shepherds on their morning patrol of the property line. When Sarah began documenting Whisker's unusual behaviors in her journal, she had no intention of sharing her observations beyond occasional professional consultations. But as winter settled over Montana and the farm's financial struggles deepened, a failed hay crop, unexpected veterinary expenses for Duke's arthritis, the ancient furnace finally giving out, Jack made a suggestion that surprised her. "You should put that cat video online," he said one evening, nodding toward her phone where she'd captured footage of Whiskers, alerting her to an impending anxiety attack. "People eat that stuff up. Might bring some clients to your practice." The video, titled "Cat Raised by German Shepherds Helps Veteran with PTSD," went viral within days. Local news picked it up first, then regional. By spring, Rolling Hills Farm was fielding calls from national morning shows and documentary filmmakers. The attention arrived with unexpected consequences. Their quiet sanctuary became a topic of debate among animal behaviorists, veterans groups, and internet commenters. Some viewers called it inspirational. Others insisted it was clearly staged. The controversy intensified when Dr. Eleanor Winters, a prominent animal psychologist from Seattle, published a scathing blog post questioning the authenticity of Whisker's behaviors. "Anthropomorphizing animals does a disservice to both the animals and to science," she wrote. "What's more likely that a common house cat has fundamentally altered its species-specific behaviors, or that well-meaning but financially struggling people have trained it to perform for clicks and attention?" The accusation stung, especially since their modest YouTube ad revenue had indeed helped keep the farm afloat through a difficult winter. Sarah found herself defending their integrity on online forums late into the night, while Jack retreated further from the unexpected spotlight. "I didn't sign up to be some circus act," he muttered after declining their 3rd interview request that week. "Me or the animals?" The controversy might have remained confined to academic circles and internet debates if not for Captain Stanley Roberts, a former Army Ranger who had served with Jack. After seeing the videos, he made the journey from his Colorado home to Rolling Hills, curious if his own PTSD might respond to animal therapy. "I've tried everything else," he told them, standing awkwardly in their kitchen, his service dog, a chocolate Labrador named Commander, sniffing cautiously at the 3 shepherds. "The VA's got me on so many meds I can barely remember my own name." His week-long visit coincided with the arrival of researchers from the University of Montana's Veterinary Science Department. Eager to observe Whiskers firsthand, their presence transformed the farmhouse into an uncomfortable blend of research station and therapeutic retreat, with Jack growing increasingly agitated under the constant observation. The situation reached a breaking point when Dr. Winters herself arrived unannounced, camera crew in tow, demanding to see this so-called therapy cat perform. The ensuing confrontation left Sarah in tears, Jack locked in their bedroom with Rex standing guard, and Whiskers in perhaps his most dog-like behavior, yet growling from atop the refrigerator at the unwelcome visitors. Spring in Montana could be treacherous, a lesson the Wilsons had learned during their years at Rolling Hills Farm, but never as dramatically as in April 2020. 3 days of relentless rain had swollen Broken Creek from a gentle stream to a roaring threat, its muddy waters rising inch by inch toward the lower pastures where their small herd of rescue horses grazed. "Weather Service says we've got maybe 6 hours before it crests," Sarah reported, hanging up the ancient kitchen phone. Her face was drawn with worry as she glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "Henderson's already evacuated his cattle to higher ground." Jack stood at the kitchen sink, his knuckles white against the countertop, eyes fixed on the distant tree line where water gleamed between the trunks. The sound of rushing water triggered memories he'd spent years trying to suppress flash floods in Afghanistan that had carried away an entire village, children's cries cut short by the merciless current. "Jack, did you hear me?" Sarah touched his arm gently. "We need to move the horses. Now." He nodded mechanically, but his breathing had already changed, growing shallow and rapid. Rex, detecting the shift, pressed against his leg while Duke and Shadow circled restlessly. On the windowsill, Whisker's ears flattened, his yellow eyes narrowing as he observed Jack's deteriorating state. "I'll get the trailer," Sarah said, grabbing her raincoat. "You round up the go-bags and emergency supplies." But Jack didn't move. The roaring in his ears wasn't just the creek anymore. It was gunfire, explosions, the memory of helplessness as nature and war combined into a perfect storm of destruction. His legs buckled, sending him sliding down against the cabinets, eyes unseeing. Outside, the rain intensified. The shepherds barked anxiously as Sarah struggled to hitch the horse trailer alone, mud sucking at her boots. When the emergency alert siren wailed from town 6 miles away, she knew they'd miscalculated. The creek was rising faster than predicted. Inside, Jack remained frozen in his waking nightmare. The dogs paced frantically, responding to the chaos but unable to break through Jack's psychological barriers. It was Whiskers who acted with decisive purpose. Leaping from the windowsill onto Jack's lap, the cat's paws pressed firmly against Jack's chest, yellow eyes locking with vacant blue ones. When that didn't work, Whiskers did something remarkable. He bit Jack's hand, not hard enough to break skin, but with sufficient pressure to create a sharp, surprising pain. Jack gasped, his awareness snapping partially back into the present. "What the—" He blinked, focusing on the cat. Whiskers released his hand and darted to the back door, meowing insistently, then returned to tug at Jack's sleeve with his teeth. The pattern repeated: door, Jack, door. The meaning was unmistakable. "Sarah," Jack whispered, his mind clearing enough to register the danger. The horses. By the time Sarah returned to the house, soaked and frantic, she found Jack stuffing emergency supplies into backpacks, the 3 shepherds at alert beside him. Whiskers perched on his shoulder like a furry epaulette, surveying the activity with military seriousness. "The road's already underwater," Sarah reported breathlessly. "I got the horses to Henderson's high pasture, but we need to get to town before the bridge goes." The evacuation became a race against nature. Their truck plowed through increasingly deep water. The shepherds crowded in the back seat while Whiskers, refusing to enter his carrier, remained perched on Jack's shoulder, his small body vibrating with tension. When they reached the creek bridge, water already lapping at its underside, Jack hesitated, paralyzed by flashbacks. "I can't," he whispered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. It was then that Whiskers performed his most incredible feat. The cat who had been raised by dogs, who had learned to overcome his own trauma, pressed his forehead against Jack's temple and began to purr a sound so incongruous with the chaos around them that it cut through Jack's terror like a lifeline. "Trust the cat," Sarah said softly, covering Jack's hand with her own. "He's gotten us this far." The flood waters of Broken Creek tore through the lower pastures of Rolling Hills Farm with terrifying force. The evacuation had been chaotic, but successful. The horses safely delivered to Henderson's high ground, the Wilsons and their animals making it across the bridge moments before it became impassable. The Red Cross shelter set up in Pinewood's high school gymnasium became their temporary home, along with 24 other displaced families. It was on the third day after the flood, when the waters had receded enough to allow emergency vehicles through, that Jack and Sarah made their first trip back to assess the damage. Captain Roberts insisted on accompanying them, his chocolate Labrador commander riding stoically in the back of his truck alongside Rex, Duke, and Whiskers, who had steadfastly refused to be separated from the shepherds. "Oh, my God," Sarah whispered as they rounded the final bend in the road. The farmhouse still stood, but the barn had partially collapsed, and the newly established therapy garden was simply gone, washed away as though it had never existed. For Jack, the sight triggered memories he'd worked months to control. His breathing quickened, hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. Beside him, Sarah reached over to place her palm atop his, a gesture that had become their silent communication of support. The 3 German shepherds bounded from the truck as soon as Jack opened the tailgate, their military training forgotten as they raced to inspect their territory. Whiskers remained perched on Jack's shoulder, surveying the devastation with unnerving focus. "Shadow!" Sarah's panicked cry cut through the quiet aftermath of disaster. The black German shepherd had ventured too close to the still-swollen creek and slipped down the muddy bank. The current, while diminished, remained treacherous, catching the aging dog and sweeping him toward a tangle of debris from the collapsed barn. Jack froze. The roaring in his ears returned the sound that always presaged his worst episodes. Captain Roberts was already racing toward the creek, but he was too far away. Sarah fumbled for her phone to call for help, knowing it would come too late. What happened next would later be analyzed by animal behaviorists and debated in scientific journals worldwide. Whiskers leapt from Jack's shoulder and streaked toward the creek bank. Without hesitation, the cat, who had been raised by dogs, plunged into the rushing water, swimming with powerful strokes toward Shadow. "No!" Sarah screamed, her veterinarian's knowledge telling her what her heart couldn't accept. A domestic cat in floodwaters stood no chance. But Whiskers reached Shadow, somehow dodging the worst of the debris. The cat clawed his way onto a floating piece of barn siding where Shadow was struggling to hold on, his back leg caught in splintered wood. Captain Roberts arrived at the bank, immediately shedding his jacket and boots. "I'm going in," he shouted. But the current shifted, sending the makeshift raft and its precious cargo toward a tangle of barbed wire fencing. The bite, quick and sharp to Shadow's trapped leg, startled the shepherd enough that he jerked free. The momentum pushed Whiskers into the barbed wire as Shadow managed to swim toward the bank, where Roberts waited to pull him to safety. When they finally reached Whiskers, the small gray body was limp, blood matting the striped fur. The tabby cat who had saved a dog, who had helped heal a broken soldier, who had defied every natural instinct of his species, lay terribly still in Sarah's trembling hands. "Don't you dare," Jack whispered fiercely, his voice breaking as they raced toward the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. "Don't you dare leave us now." Winter settled over Rolling Hills Farm, softening the scars left by the spring flood with pristine snow. 6 months had passed since Whiskers' heroic act and subsequent injury, and the tabby cat now moved with a slight but noticeable limp, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice. The Wilsons' living room, once a private sanctuary, had been transformed into something of an impromptu research center. Abigail Harmon, a neurobiologist from Colorado State University specializing in animal cognition, adjusted the small, non-invasive monitoring sensors attached to Whisker's head as he sat with unusual patience. "I've studied service dogs for 15 years, she said, shaking her head in amazement as the readings appeared on her laptop. "The neural response patterns I'm seeing in Whiskers are remarkably similar to those we've documented in highly trained assistance animals." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "So you're saying this isn't just mimicry? I'm saying it's unprecedented." Dr. Harmon replied carefully. "Somehow, this cat has developed not just behavioral patterns, but actual neurological pathways typically found in social pack animals. The question is, how?" The mystery of Whiskers had attracted a small but devoted following in the scientific community. What had begun as skepticism had evolved into genuine curiosity after footage of the flood rescue captured by a news helicopter and broadcast nationally showed irrefutable evidence of the cat's extraordinary behavior. Jack, who had once shunned attention, now found himself reluctantly thrust into the role of advocate. The Department of Veterans Affairs had initially rejected his application to have Whiskers officially recognized as a service animal, citing rigid species restrictions in their guidelines. The regulations specifically state dogs only, the VA representative had explained during their appeal hearing in Billings. "While we acknowledge your cat's unusual abilities, we simply have no provision for feline service animals." The rejection had sparked something unexpected in Jack's indignation that bloomed into purpose. With the help of Captain Roberts and other veterans who had visited Rolling Hills to witness Whiskers firsthand, he launched a campaign to amend the service animal regulations. "It's not just about Whiskers," Jack explained to the reporter from the Military Times who had come to interview him. "It's about recognizing that healing comes in unexpected forms. Some vets connect with dogs, others with horses. My lifeline happened to have 4 paws and whiskers." Sarah watched her husband with quiet pride as he spoke into the reporter's recorder, noting how his hands remained steady, his voice clear. The flashbacks hadn't disappeared entirely. Trauma never simply vanished, but their frequency and intensity had diminished dramatically. Winters, once their most vocal critic, made her own unexpected reversal during a prestigious conference on animal-assisted therapy. "I was wrong," she admitted to the assembled experts, displaying the data collected from Whiskers. "This case challenges everything we thought we knew about interspecies behavioral adaptation and the neuroplasticity of companion animals." The validation from the scientific community coincided with a groundswell of support from veterans groups nationwide. Letters poured into Rolling Hills Farm, some addressed to Jack and Sarah, others directly to Whiskers' feline hero, each sharing stories of struggles with PTSD and the healing power of animal connections. "We don't need permission to heal," Jack told Sarah one evening as they sorted through the day's mail. "But recognition opens doors for others." 1 year after the flood that had nearly claimed their lives, Rolling Hills Farm hosted a gathering unlike any other. The gravel driveway, freshly raked for the occasion, accommodated a dozen vehicles bearing license plates from Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and beyond. The old barn, restored and expanded with the help of a veterans group construction team, now housed a small but well-equipped animal therapy training center. Jack Wilson stood on the porch, watching as visitors made their way across the yard. His posture, once perpetually tense, had softened. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded. At his feet, the 3 German shepherds, Rex, Duke, and Shadow, observed the proceedings with dignified interest, their gray muzzles betraying their advancing years. "Never thought I'd see the day," murmured Captain Roberts. now a regular visitor and unofficial program coordinator for what they called the Cross-Species Therapy Initiative. He nodded toward the small stage erected near the paddock fence. A medal ceremony for a cat. My grandfather would roll over in his grave. Sarah emerged from the house, dressed in a simple blue sundress instead of her usual work clothes or veterinary scrubs. In her arms, Whiskers reclined with regal composure, his gray tabby coat gleaming in the Montana sunshine, the slight limp in his back leg barely noticeable as she set him down on the porch railing. The ceremony itself was modest but meaningful. Dr. Harmon presented her published findings in the Journal of Veterinary Behavior, documenting what she called unprecedented cross-species behavioral adaptation. The local congressman, initially skeptical but eventually won over, announced that the VA had approved a pilot program to evaluate non-canine service animals on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places, the congressman concluded, affixing a small, specially designed medal to Whiskers' collar. The cat endured the attention with what observers swore was dignified tolerance, yellow eyes surveying the crowd with the same watchful care he'd always shown Jack. As twilight settled over the farm, the visitors departed one by one, leaving the Wilsons to their peaceful routine. Jack and Sarah sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies emerge over the meadow. The three shepherds dozed on the weathered boards at their feet. And Whiskers, the cat, who thought he was a dog, the unlikely hero who had transcended the limitations of his species through the simple power of adaptation and love, curled contentedly in the center of the canine trio, a small gray comma in a circle of fur and friendship. "You know what I realized," Jack said softly, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "It was never about whether he was acting like a dog or a cat. It was about him figuring out how to communicate in a language I could understand when I needed it most." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder. "That's what family does." In the fading light, the unusual family, 3 dogs, 1 cat, and 2 humans remained together on the porch of Rolling Hills Farm, each one healing the others in ways science was only beginning to understand. In the quiet corners of our lives, healing often arrives in unexpected forms. Jack and Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes, when the world seems darkest, when the floods of life threaten to overwhelm us, salvation can come with 4 small paws and a determined spirit. Many of us who've weathered life's storms understand the comfort of a faithful companion. Whether we served overseas like Jack or simply faced the personal battles that come with living over 5 decades on this earth, we know what it means to feel isolated, to struggle with changes to our bodies and minds that others can't see. Whiskers' extraordinary journey teaches us that it's never too late to adapt, to learn new ways of being, to find purpose in helping others heal. This remarkable cat, raised by 3 German shepherds on a Montana farm, transcended the limitations others placed on him, just as we can transcend the limitations society often places on us as we age. Whether you're battling memories that won't fade, adjusting to retirement, or simply seeking deeper connection in your golden years, remember Jack and Whiskers. Remember that healing comes in many forms, and that it's never too late to become the hero in someone else's story or in your own. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.